yeah, Rupa, to actually create some sort of a organization or some sort of a unit where you can actually give a few hours where you can counsel startups on their products and their way they're doing it for free.
For free is the only objectionable
I have, because we've actually started that. So can I just take 2 minutes about? Can I take 2 minutes about Thai Bangalore? So we've actually put together Thai Bangalore Legal Clinic, where we are. I am. What do you say? Literally pulling lawyers by their collar. We started it. It's still nascent. But after a lot of push, you will get pulled. But a lot of push, because lawyers today, especially the senior lawyers, are expensive. And what also we don't realize is those who work with startups, we've actually spent a lot of hours pro bono, in the past, which have gone unaccounted for. So what we're trying to do is through organizations, non-profit organizations, we're actually setting up clinics, and hopefully that we can take them to law schools also, where we have senior lawyers come and give 2 hours of their time once in 6 months, which is a great brand building, as well as some of these startups could be your next Flipkart or whatever. So we started it already. Hopefully this will be implemented in other places. So all the law firms, please wait for my call. You will be called.
So Rupa, just on that. So I think, frankly, each and every law firm recognizes the opportunity that this revolution, this is nothing short of revolution, brings for everyone, and everyone is trying to do their bits. Whether it's about doing pro bono work at discounted rates. I've heard there are new business models coming up where people are trying to get ESOP for their legal services rendered. It may be grapevine, but it may be true. But the fact of the matter is that nobody wants to miss on this opportunity. And while there is going to be, there is a CSR element attached to it where you do pro bono work, but hopefully it'll work out for the best and in each and everyone's interests as well. Speaking on mentorship and the example that Rashi was earlier referring to, this was my first meeting with Vinayak when he approached AZB on a particular issue. And when he laid out the business model and what he intended to do, literally my first question was, कोई मर रहा है तो वो ऐप का बटन क्यों दबाएगा? Right? So I have a bad habit of trying to understand business models first before advising clients. But he had a logical answer. And when he was able to convince me, and I'm not even the commercial guy, I said, okay, now let's discuss what is that you want to do and how you can do it. So yes, it's important to have a mentor, but maybe even if you're not able to always find a mentor, you need to reach out to the right people, or at least speak to people who can guide you to the right counselors who can give you sound advice. Just outside, Sameer was describing his model to me, and obviously lawyers speak language that most people don't understand. So my question to him was that, have you considered applying for a license under the Payment and Settlement of Systems Act of 2007? And he's like, what? I thought I was consulting law firms. So everyone is going to have their views, and we discussed his model further, and it was kosher and everything. But people need to know that, one, even if you think that consulting or engaging with lawyers is an expense, or the other consulting is an expense, it is not simply about kharcha. In some organizations, and this is particularly true for promoter-driven organizations, where legal reports into finance, it is difficult to find bigger examples of conflict of interest, right? Because the moment legal reports into finance, you will not be able to make dispassionate assessments. Everything is going to be driven by how much money you are spending. Of course, having money is the first problem, but then you need to utilize it effectively. And I think consultants, including lawyers, are very, very open to discussing long-term arrangements when it comes to accommodating startups, because they want to simply be part of this revolution.
We have a concept, sorry, I pulled it up. We have a concept of, in the SaaS software companies, we have a concept called free trial. 1 month free trial hota hai hamara. I think ऐसा legal, law firms में होना चाहिए कि एक free trial तो बनता है.
Law firms understand the concept of trial very differently.
Right.
Okay, sir.
But there was someone in the back. Yeah, please.
It's a good lead gen, I'm telling you.
I think you've been looking to speak for a while.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Sorry, after you.
Hi, good evening, everyone. I'm from gymchalo.com. So basically, it's into health and fitness. I won't be talking about age and all. So basically, I want to talk about as soon as college got over, I got into this and then I wanted to share something. A lot of people say that, after college, you should not do it, you should gain the right experience, something. Personally, for me, it was more of like, I could just try anything. So that was the biggest gain. I used to maybe sometimes just get up at the night and just say, okay, this is the idea, this is a $1 million idea, make a website, get the data done, I'll be $1 million the next day. But gradually, as you come down to the bottom line and then you start seeing things into reality. So I would definitely advise people, maybe just after college, go for it.
That's great. I think you had a comment there? Yes, please. Let me get you a mic.
Thank you. No, I just had a question from everyone in the panel and in the room. I think in Bangalore, I feel it's more fashionable to be a mentor than an entrepreneur. It's fashionable to be a mentor than an entrepreneur. I see everyone who's a mentor, and I really don't know what they're doing. And many of them are, no offense, retired corporate, so I qualify. Anyone looking for mentors, you can call me. But I just wanted to hear some thoughts around experiences people have had with a good mentor and, more importantly, a bad mentor. Like in companies, we always had, coaches for performance evaluation, someone who can really be honest with you. Maybe they're brutally honest, but they're honest nonetheless, but help you figure out your own problems and solutions. But this proliferation of mentors, I don't know if it's really helping or, who's a good mentor, who's not, and what have been experiences people have had around that. Thank you.
I think you've hit the nail on the head where you say, dispassionate. We've come across situations. I've had, my brother-in-law ask me, what do you think of this idea? Or my, cousin asked me about this. And I think there is a need, and I think that's where Rachit was also saying earlier, that you engage with somebody who's a professional and engage with them early, obviously on terms that work for both people, because a lot of so-called mentors are too emotionally attached to either the person or the idea or the company. And they are not genuine and objective in their views. Sometimes you just have to, you may just need somebody who says, listen, I think this is my view, but I think it's time you cut your losses. This is not going to go anywhere. And it is very hard for somebody who is not a professional to give you that advice because they are otherwise attached to it.
Yeah, I think on mentorship, one of the things I will tell you from my own experience is that being on both sides of it, being an entrepreneur as well as somewhat of a mentor as a lawyer, I think there is a certain amount of responsibility that should come with that. And I think one of the biggest flaws I feel is that when we go out and hire professionally trained people who don't really understand entrepreneurship, it's like bringing what they need to understand is that this is a baby versus an adult. What they've dealt with are adults. They have gone to corporates, they've dealt with situations. But when you're talking to an entrepreneur, you really need to understand his business, his personality, his or her, I'm sorry to be gender neutral, his spirit, to be able to advise. What we find, and in fact I would blame myself too, is that whenever, although we all have as law firms, as Rachit said, it's very fashionable to actually say that we have an incubation model, and I say the same thing. But the key question is, you need to be tested out as a mentor before you are actually designated as one. Because as a mentor to a baby, you need to realize that your entire wisdom and experience base that is coming are you dealing with the person based on some symptoms, just like a doctor would deal with a patient, whether it's a cold or cough patient, or he may try to understand exactly why there is a problem with this person who's suffering from cold and cough. So it's very important that before you choose your mentor, in my mind, before you designate a mentor, I mean, we as professionals, believe me, I would love to be a mentor to some people. We may not be equipped to be your mentors. We may pretend to be mentors. Yeah, please go ahead.
So on the topic of mentorship, firstly, Rachit spoke about our first meeting, and I would like to sort of compliment him on helping us along our journey, especially on the legal front, because obviously how he and his firm has helped us as partners, as mentors, has been of tremendous help. So there's great value of professional help, as I can sort of vouch for it. I think what makes for a bad mentor, somebody asked, without trying to quantify it, I think the risk when there is a baby and it's a nascent stage is what you do not want is somebody who overdoes the McKinsey with you. You're just starting out, you're figuring it out. You're also figuring out your market, and you will pivot. I mean, like Instagram, for example, and there's an extreme case, did not start up as what it is today. It had bunch of features, and most of them, by the way, over time got killed, and the only thing that remained is this photo album, effectively. And again, if you had asked a lot of people, wise people, from the McKinsey type universe, hey, this is this product which does this photograph stuff, I can assure you a lot of them would have said, it doesn't make sense, there's no market size, there's no market fit, and all these fancy words that come across. So that makes a bad mentor for sure, I can tell you. What makes a good mentor is somebody who can be a guardian angel, and that could be from a legal perspective, it could be a lawyer. It could be somebody who has gone to war before. For us, for example, beyond the law, two of our most influential sort of guardian angels are people who are also on our board of advisors. One of them was heading product at a very, very successful Silicon Valley company. He happened to be my roommate at college, so that helped. Another one is an investor and also a very successful entrepreneur. Both of them have gone to war before. And I say gone to war means in this domain of building something from literally zero and having gone through this really exciting but painful ride. So that's what makes a good mentor and what makes a bad mentor. Don't overcomplicate it. Don't get into PowerPoints, and again, I keep talking about the McKinsey style. Don't do that, because then that's the death of your idea, in my opinion, in the early days.
Just talking about mentor, I would just want to say is that it's like a coach. गली क्रिकेट खेल रहा था विराट कोहली, उसको उठा के आपने स्टेडियम में अगर गेमिंग उसको खिलवाना है तो उससे पहले उसकी कुछ ट्रेनिंग होगी, एंड यू टू कोच हिम. इट्स एग्जैक्टली दैट. गली क्रिकेट नहीं है what is being played. So the job of the mentor, the coach, is to actually get him to prepare, build the right muscle, build the right habits for getting him there or her there to execute right. And that's it, I don't have much.
Well, I'm happy to take one more comment. I didn't even realize we've gone through 1.5 hours and we still are touching the tip of the iceberg. Why don't I take the two comments right there?
Okay.
Please go ahead.
Hi, my name is Ranga. Okay, there is some misconception that lawyers charge a lot. Okay, that's wrong, I believe. Yeah, if you're looking for likes of Amachans, if you're looking for likes of AZBs, yes, they would charge, but you need to look at some mid-sized law firms. Like in our case, we have had lots of startups, and they did not pay us for 2 years. Now they are paying us premium.
No payment for 2 years? Okay, please can you give me your card?
So there's one more.
I got that.
Please.
I got that.
Yeah, so I was talking about the mentorship, and I feel it's not just one mentor who's required. There should be more than one most of the time. So as in our case, like we clearly had at least 3 mentors at one point of time. One would talk about business, somebody could talk about art history and how to collaborate art knowledge into the business. Somebody could talk about how to make the models more sustainable, So we had academic mentors, and we had a lot of business case studies on us. One of them got published at Ivy. So that was all because thanks to my mentor who suggested me to standardize our processes. So I always believe that these mentors have a very responsible role to play, and I now also act as a mentor to some of my colleagues and mentees. But the idea is to have more than one in diverse things, because legal mentors, they would understand the legal aspects of things much better than anybody else, you know. So in every area, I feel we need to have one mentor, I suppose.
Well, with that, I think I'm getting enough signals from everyone. I am going to close this. I think this was a very enriching experience, and thank you, audience and panelists, for really sharing your experiences and speaking from your heart. Swati, all yours.
I'm glad that we could cater to a lot of questions from the audience as well. We were able to discuss various aspects and even get into a little illegality. Nevertheless, great session. Now I'll request Ms. Bitika Anand, founder CEO of Legally Consulting, to present mementos to our panelists. Mr. Dheer. For Mr. Manav Nagraj. Mr. Rachit Behel. Ms. Rupa Doraswamy. Mr. Samir Grover. And for Mr. Vinayak Dalmia. Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for this panel. Thank you so much. Without breaking the momentum, let us quickly transition into our next session, Raising Capital. Raising capital is not about making a decision between debt and equity. It is also to do with understanding the need and choosing the right funding option. Let us welcome our session members. The chair for this panel is Mr. Ketan Mukhija. Well, I think Ketan has just stepped out of the hall. Nevertheless, let's just keep going. The chair for this panel, like I said, is Mr. Ketan Mukhija, Senior Vice President, Legal, Corporate Strategy and Planning, Shrey Infrastructure Finance Limited. Ketan possesses extensive work experience in the area of mergers and acquisition, corporate restructuring and private equity, and has gained valuable experience in representing in sophisticated transactions as well as general corporate advisory. Next, I would like to welcome Abhinav Ashwin, partner AZB and partner. Abhinav is a partner handling Abhinav is a partner handling taxation matters at AZB and Partners Delhi. He has around 11 years of experience in handling direct tax and indirect tax matter. Prior to AZB, he has worked with E&Y in their Global Tax Advisory Services division. I would request Abhinav to please join us on the stage. Ketan, as our panelists, as a chair for the session, I would request you on the stage as well. Next, please join me in welcoming Ms. Angira Singhvi, partner Khaitan and Khaitan. Angira advises clients on their corporate, commercial, employment, and intellectual property matters across various sectors. She heads the startup desk at the firm and advises and handholds startups with respect to establishment and setting up of their businesses, obtaining regulatory approvals, IP protection, advising on investments, and so on. I believe that, yeah, all right, nevertheless. Moving on, I would request Ashneer Grover, Head Finance, Grofers, to join us at the stage. Grofers, which was founded in 2014, is now a 5,000 people strong organization with operations in 10 cities. Mr. Grover has passionately been a part of this organization's a complement to connect consumers with their local neighborhood merchants such as grocery shops, fruit and vegetable vendors, bakeries, pharmacies, etc., getting a wide range of products delivered to their doorsteps within 90 minutes. I further call upon Ms. Reba Chako, partner Cyril Amarchand Mangaldas. Reba presently heads the Bangalore office and has been with the firm since 1999. She specializes in private equity, venture capital investments, merger and acquisition, takeover and joint ventures. She advises both buy-side as well as sell-side in strategic sale transactions in India, as well as financial investor stake sales. Please put your hands together for this panel. I would now request Ketan to take over the session. Thank you.
Can I just take a mic? Good evening, one and all. Yeah. Thank you for introducing us. So half of my job is done practically. Now, to give a flavor, hang and drift to this session, just to introduce this session, we've already been introduced to the panelists now. We all know that startups is the buzzword of the day, and the moment since I've entered here, we've been hearing a lot about startups, the regulatory frameworks, the financial frameworks, the commercial frameworks, the business frameworks surrounding them. And in this session specifically, since we are running almost on time, we have one good productive hour ahead of us. And I would request the panelists to actually give us their insights and perspectives on certain things. As we move along, we'll set the ball rolling to make it as user-friendly, as interactive, as value-creating as possible. And obviously, we don't want to designate a particular time for the question and answer sessions. So if anyone, obviously once the panelist is done, please feel free to interrupt, and we can actually, mold and respond and react to the query at hand. So in fact, this comes in very handy because only I think earlier today, I was reading this bi-monthly report of the Reserve Bank of India, wherein they've come with monetary policy relaxing certain norms further on for startups. So there was some talk regarding the repatriation, regarding the opening of foreign currency accounts overseas, etc. And it came as recently as yesterday. So I was pleasantly surprised that, probably Bithika coincided the right timings, and we had like a good session and good food for thought ahead of us. So I think, in this session, we broadly want to proceed somewhat like this, obviously subject to the flow of the session itself. We have Reba from the regulatory perspective. We have Angira, who will throw some light on the documentation perspective, the life cycle of how a startup and how financing of a startup from an investor's perspective looks like. And we have Abhinav, who can throw some light on the taxation, the structuring, because I think, in any private equity or a startup transaction, when it raises the capital, the way it's raised, the structuring of that, the flow of funds is very, very critical and imperative. And obviously, from a business perspective, we have Ashneer, who can obviously give us some lights from the other side of the table as to how the world looks like. I want to just begin this session and kick off by probably, just throwing it open to Reba. If she can throw some, broad insights and perspectives around the regulatory hassles and challenges which this sector is riddled by, especially in the light of the recent liberalizations and relaxations that the government, both at the FIPV, at the DIPP, the Reserve Bank of India, and even at SEBI, they have introduced the institutional trading platform. So something which is more nuanced. I am sure, half of the audience is already initiated into law, so we don't really need to get to the basics. Some kind of nuanced discussion around the regulatory challenges and how the fraternity reacts to it.
Sure.
Please.
Thanks, Ketan. So I think not getting into too many technicals or making myself sound too legal. Startup businesses equal to innovative ideas, innovative business models, disruptive businesses. These are all, they're all synonymous to each other when you think of the startup space. And hand in hand, what goes would be that there are regulatory uncertainties or the shades of gray that you have to walk through in deciding, and in the last panel we heard that very briefly. There may be an idea or an innovative business model or a thought which is the seed for a startup, but what it really could mean regulatorily is whether it is possible to do it, whether it's regulated, you need any approvals or licenses, are you allowed to receive foreign capital without any restrictions? There are several questions, and often many startups fall between the cracks because one does not, firstly, you may not think in the first place whether it's covered from a regulatory perspective. Secondly, even if you think about it, you may not have a clear answer. And very standard examples which are familiar to all of us. When we started the entire e-com buzz a few years ago, whether and there were restrictions on foreign capital coming into B2C business, there were questions about what kind of business models will work. Do you need a front-end company which is Indian owned and controlled? Can I get capital into a company which is actually interfacing with the end consumer? There came up the marketplace model, as we call, which is that the startup or the business really is not buying and selling. So that's the entire e-commerce marketplace, back-end, front-end business model structures which had to be looked at very carefully to see where it fell in the regulatory framework. Of late, we are hearing about taxi aggregation or bus aggregation, and there are two different aspects again, and we know of a huge amount of scrutiny which many businesses are going through, of course triggered by a very unrelated sort of emotional event, and that set the ball rolling regulatorily, and you have this very reactive or reactionary behavior of the bureaucracy, where there was an unfortunate event which happened in Delhi and then led to the question of what is regulating these people, where do they fall in terms of business, are they governed by the Motor Vehicles Act, or is it only the driver who is supposed to be registered under a Motor Vehicles Act? Are these businesses simply providing an app or a technology interface for other individuals who are regulated by the MV Act, and so on and so forth? What does that lead to? The government comes with an advisory guideline, and say that leaves it to the states to decide what they want to do. And we are in fact awaiting. Karnataka has just come up with something. Delhi is slightly different. Maharashtra is slightly different. So businesses are really trying to figure out, where I have businesses across the country, what is it that I need to do in different states? Do I need to be regulated, or do I need to change my contractual framework with operators that I'm dealing with? Or do I need to change my framework with drivers who are on my rolls? So that's another example. Thirdly, third illustration of online map makers, and that's again something. And a few months ago, the regulators came out when an FIPB application was submitted saying, I don't know whether it's allowed or not. Please tell us whether it's allowed or not. The response was, we don't know. And it doesn't look like it's regulated, so we'll have to think about what the policy is. So when I'm starting a business which has got something to do with it, I really have to decide whether I want to do it. Do I want to take a risk? Or because the regulator hasn't told me whether it's doable or not.
I think a very interesting question comes to my mind. Thank you for giving a very vantage macro level perspective. Can I just interrupt you for a moment? Because this is strictly coming from an investor perspective. So where we belong is basically Shree Infrastructure, which is into investments, both on the financial front as well as the strategic front. One of the challenges that we faced, in fact, last year, and coming from a first-hand perspective, was when RBI suddenly came up with a guideline, or rather a norm in the FEMA, saying that, the assured returns, which is typically what a VC or a PE looks for, that, my ROI, my RR is secured, protected. That cannot happen when it's an equity investment. So we actually face that in one of the critical transactions that is almost underway now before the CCA. How would you react to that?
You can't do it. You can't do it. And if what is doable, and they've said that you can do assured returns as long as it's linked to some kind of market valuation. You will have to come to some of us to structure intelligently to see how to get the assured return. But in simple terms, jokes apart, I can't have a 24% IRR deal not linked to what the market value of that business is 3 years down the line. But what is possible is, valuation. What the Reserve Bank has done is they've literally liberalized the valuation process. So I have enough flexibility on what methodology I follow in valuing my business, in arriving at what that valuation is. So for instance, if there's a business which is in a default of some kind, which valuation methodology would I apply where that certain default will sort of bring down the value, or there could be a valuation methodology which is very, very different. So what Reserve Bank has said is that you're doing business, you may choose what valuation methodology you deem appropriate in arriving at fair value, but that's the value you're subject to.
Correct. So I think the moral of the story is we have to strike some kind of judicious balance between the incentive/disincentive matrix of the investors vis-a-vis the investee or the target company, which is very critical now. I think at this juncture, it would make some sense for us to actually understand from Angira the life cycle of how this transaction, so if a startup is looking to actually start this process, say from a drafting, contractual, legal perspective, who's not initiated, who's coming strictly from a commercial background, how do we go about it? We all have heard fancy terms like term sheet, memoranda, collaboration agreements, share purchase, definitives, etc. In a summary, if you can tell us, how this whole life cycle looks like organically, which would definitely, I think, benefit the audience.
Thank you, Ketan. So when it comes to startups, once the viability has been confirmed, yes, the business model is economically viable. And as Reba covered very nicely, that regulatorily you should have a clarity whether your business model is subject to any regulations that may make your business shut down later, or whether it is permissible under law to carry out such a business. The first thing which is often ignored by people who are simply driven by the ideas is that the documentation has to be right from the very first step. So the cycle, as Ketan just mentioned, it starts from having the documents in place. Often you would enter into talks with people who want to invest in your company, or for that matter, you're sharing your business model with, who would want to enter into a business relationship with you. You should bear in mind that there should be an NDA in place, because it is your idea which you are sharing with the company, and you would not want that to be leaked. So it starts with an NDA stage. Then it is also very important at the initial stage to make sure that you have appropriate documentation entered into with all the third parties. So often you'll see that an investor will conduct a due diligence over your company as and when they want to invest. And a lot of times we come across a situation where appropriate documentation is not in place. So they don't have contracts with their suppliers, they don't have contracts with their contract managers, or they've outsourced their personnel, but they don't have any agreements. Or if they do have agreements, then they do not contain terms which could be favorable from an investment perspective. For example, you would have excessive control by the third parties, or you would have change in control provisions. Okay, sorry, I'm just getting too technical, but this is how an investor takes a complete backseat. So it is very important for you to just see what you're signing, which is usually a standard format of a big company that you're dealing with. You simply sign that. So you should be aware that what you're signing may possibly have long-term consequences on your business model. So for example, we've recently been advising a company who had signed a software agreement with an American counterpart, which had the jurisdiction and the dispute resolution forum as US. And the indemnity, basically they could have to pay for all the consequential losses of what the counterparty would have incurred under the US law. These sort of provisions simply end up making your earnings of, say, the past 5 years or 10 years come to a nil. So you should be very careful from the very beginning. You could engage one of the consultants to make sure they handhold you from the very beginning. For startups, we've also seen recently that since the business ideas are unique, to the extent they can, it's advisable to have exclusive arrangements with your clients. Uh, you would often see that one model comes, it becomes a hit, and then you see 4 or 5 coming down the line in the same business. So competition is just there all the time. To the extent you can, it's good that you have exclusive arrangements with your clients. So once you see that these small things are taken care of in your business, then ultimately comes the investment stage, because the investor has to conduct a due diligence. He has to be satisfied that your documents are in place. Ultimately, when the investment stage comes in, you should be able to negotiate basis your idea, basis your inputs that have been devoted to the company. So a very interesting example that we are currently working on is a food-related startup who have been able to convince their investors that whatever we want in the agreement, as opposed to what usually an investor wants, should be stipulated. The return should not be more than an X%. The dilution cannot be more than an X%, which there are innovative ways of coming to these private equity deals now, which were unheard of probably, say, 2 years back. So you could try and hit one of those deals basis the innovation that lies behind your business model. So having faith in your business model and taking it further can actually help you get a very good deal with the investor. The final documentation can then be closed very successfully.
Sure. I think the importance of good contractual or robust documentation cannot be overstated. Especially, I just want to make 2 very quick points. So when I was reading this monetary policy of the RBI, they clearly said, from a transfer pricing perspective, taxation perspective, or if you have to make use or advantage of these liberalized norms, you better have the contractual, arrangements between your overseas subsidiary and the Indian setup very robustly laid out. Similarly, I come from a company which has more than 100 entities, so we see that, majority of litigation actually happens because we do not have any contractual arrangements in place in black and white. From a business perspective, from a promoter perspective, or from an in-house perspective, we always think that, this black and white and the number of pages is somewhat, slightly onerous and cumbersome, but yes, I think somewhere down the line it actually, starts eating up. So it's very important for us to have a well laid out, good, robust framework of both the operatives as well as the definitive transaction documents when we do embark upon some kind of an investment or a strategic kind of transaction. So I think that's a very important takeaway. Moving on, I think, we've all heard of this recent Supreme Court ruling of Gotham Limestone. I think it's very important, once the diligence, etc. is done, once we are sure that the confirmatory aspects are fine, and we want to move ahead with the transaction, especially when we are doing an overseas transaction, wherein the jurisdictions like Russia or Middle East or the MENA regions, etc. are involved. What is very important, Abhinav, what we have noticed is the structuring from a taxation perspective. And obviously, since this is an area which is always in one of the 50 shades of grey, wherein some kind of ambiguity and nebulousness always creeps in, wherein nobody is sure, and even if we, as you rightly pointed out, earlier today when we were having an informal conversation, that even if we go to a firm or a big four, the opinion that we get is always heavily caveated, heavily safe harbored. In this scenario, how do you see, yes, of course, the structuring is very imperative. How do we actually rigor and circumvent the rigors of this taxation imbroglio that has been generated and the different structures, innovative structures that you've come across? Some light on that.
So, yeah, that's a very valid point, because when we are talking about startups, I think one of the key features we're talking about is sustainability. And tax obviously has a big role to play in as much as it can derail the whole process. And more importantly, because tax by very nature will manifest itself 3, 4, 5, 6 years down the line. So you may have put a structure into place, but that structure from a tax perspective will unravel and implications will arise only by the time your structure has gained some momentum. And therefore it is important that when you're at the drawing board, your structuring is kosher. Just like any other regulatory or legal perspective, there may not be clear answers to everything. But what is important, as I feel, is when you're at the structuring board, the first thing you should ensure is that from a tax, corporate, commercial, all perspectives, the positions which you take are actually simultaneous and consistent. Because more often than not, you see that from a tax structuring perspective, someone will tell you structure it as a sale of goods, services. From your FDI perspective, you would have taken a contrary position. From an indirect tax perspective, there may be VAT service tax implications. So if you, when at the drawing board stage, if you are not sitting with your commercial team and corporate team to just analyze that what are the tax implications, tax cannot be a subsequent afterthought. It has to be a part of the structuring process. And here, if I may add, as you rightly mentioned, the Supreme Court decision. So from an investor perspective also, and this is very true in terms of startups, when as a startup you're interested in getting funds, more often than not, the more wiser investors will suggest you structures because they've been there, done that. And when they do that, it is also possible that in the flow to get funds, in the anticipation of getting things sealed fast, you are not applying too much mind to your structuring, you are simply replicating because it has been done elsewhere, etc. From a tax perspective, the most important thing is the commercial rationale. And if your structure to you does not have a commercial rationale, despite what any law firm, what any consultant may tell you, the structure is worth a relook. So I think, and that is what the Supreme Court has said, that if you're indirectly trying to do something which was directly prohibited, then I as a court or any authority is completely within its powers to unpeel the structure, unwound the structure, and that will have implications from a regulatory perspective, tax perspective, etc. So I think the most important thing here is understand the fact that yes, structures are there. We come up with a lot of structures as advisors, but then you as a startup has to first figure it out that does it make commercial sense? Is there a commercial rationale to it? Yes, it sounds all fancy, but can I actually justify my commercial objective, commercial sense? If it does not, please feel free to throw it back at your investor, at your advisor and tell them, I have doubts, there's nothing wrong with it. Correct.
I think figures and numbers never lie. So I think the important takeaway is the underpinnings on which any Supreme Court judgment, ruling, tribunal's judgment or judicial precedent is actually based on, and that is exactly what is highlighted by Abhinav. So I think it's a very important takeaway from for us in-house perspective. Also, I think I'll just probably ask you one more point here, specifically try to seek some free advice here on this forum. So we are a group, so assuming there's a group which has like so many entities, some obviously are loss making, some cash flows, the bottom line is good, and in some entities we want to actually carry forward the absorbed the accumulated losses, carry it forward in order to actually structure the transaction that way. Do you see any challenge on that front? Because if you actually do a share purchase inter se while reorganizing some kind of revenues between the entities intra-group, we often come across this structuring advice wherein you can actually set off or carry forward some unabsorbed losses to the next fiscal. But how viable, plausible is it under the legal front?
So in terms of the tax laws, carry forward of losses are permissible, but there are certain conditions and restrictions regarding a certain percentage of beneficial shareholding should not change. And everyone was very happy when recently Karnataka High Court gave a decision saying that if it is an intra-group transaction, ultimate parent is the same, you can do any kind of restructuring, immediate shareholders changing would not have an impact. Now, the big risk there was that a corporate or an investor themselves was offering to the authorities to pierce the corporate veil, to go beyond. And that itself is a very risky proposition. Karnataka High Court Delhi High Court has taken a contrary decision, which in my opinion is correct, that in terms of carry forward of losses, the immediate shareholding is what is relevant. So in intra-group structuring and all, you can keep on making arguments, and it opens a whole plethora of issues. Then essentially you're saying my immediate shareholder is not my beneficial shareholder, and then you know where God will land you.
Right. So again, we come across some kind of haze along the maze of various regulations that we have in tax, and fine, we will look into this closely, because yes, there is disparity between different high courts and the judgments as well. Let me move on now to Ashneer from an industry perspective. Given that you are there on the other side of the table, what are the and I was very happy to hear the introduction. You've actually made our lives easier, your company, who have actually, somewhat connected to our doorsteps, the various kind of, the daily necessities that we actually need on a very regular basis. So yes, it comes across as like, blessing, not in disguise, but so very tangible. But from a structural, operational perspective, what are the key challenges that you face and how have you managed to overcome them along the way? If you can throw some light.
Yeah, so see, I have slightly different views than this panel, right? And I should have different views because I'm from the other side, right? We've done now 4 fundraisers. We've raised more than 1,000 crores. So we have done rounds as small as 3 crores. And we have done rounds as big as 800 crores. Having gone through the whole process, I feel the whole documentation and the amount of time spent on documentation and lawyers is complete waste, right? I can't find any value in it, absolutely zilch, okay? And I've worked with lawyers who are well intentioned, right? It's not that I was working with lawyers who were billing me and I got sort of felt ripped off and said कि नहीं अब तो मैं एक forum में आके इनकी बजाऊंगा. The fact is कि if you're a startup, right, आपको एक चीज क्लियर होनी चाहिए कि आपने वैल्यू क्रिएट नहीं की है, right? There is hope that आप एक दिन धंधा खड़ा करोगे और उसमें से वैल्यू क्रिएट होगी, उस वैल्यू में से कुछ परसेंटेज राइटफुली आपके पास आएगा. एज अ टेक्नोलॉजी स्टार्टअप तो आपने उस कंपनी में पैसे भी नहीं लगाए. यू स्टार्टेड विद 1 लाख का कैपिटल, उसमें भी तो 50,000 किसी से मांगे, 50,000 किसी से मांगे, राइट? सो यू हैव जीरो कैपिटल infused in the thing. I think where a lot of people get lost and actually start living the truth is when they start feeling कि हमने तो from day one value बना दी, या अगर मेरे को कोई 50 करोड़ रुपए देने को तैयार हो गया है एंड मेरी डाइल्यूशन सिर्फ 50% हो रही है, इसका मतलब बाकी 50 करोड़ रुपए मैंने कमा लिए, राइट? दैट इज द रूट cause, and that is where you fall into the trap of documentation, value protection, ye clause, wo clause. I, along with my founders, like my founders hardly spent 5 minutes on any fundraise, and that 5 minutes was spent on saying, yaar bol de kahan sign karna hai, kar dete hain, right? I used to go and sit with the lawyers, and I've gone through again and again. Fundamentally, fact is this, कि the only protection that you can expect in a startup is commercial. अगर आपने धंधा खड़ा कर दिया, there is no reason for any investor, despite whatever he would have written in any document, to sort of go and screw you over और say कि नहीं तूने इतना वैल्यू क्रिएट नहीं करा, राइट? बिकॉज आपको इतना फेथ होना चाहिए कि जो बंदा पैसा लगा रहा है उसके पास पैसे लगाने के सिवाय कोई कैपेबिलिटी नहीं है. यू आर द ऑपरेटर, राइट? सो वेदर यू क्रिएट अ बिजनेस विच इज वर्थ 100 million, 200 million, 500 million or $1 billion is going to play out over time. Now, अगर आपको किसी ने ये डॉक्यूमेंट दे दिया, उसमें लिखा है कि 3 साल के बाद आपके शेयर 0 हो जाएंगे, ठीक है? टेक्निकली ये लिखा आपके शेयर 0 हो जाएंगे, आपने साइन कर दिया. In 2 years time, if you go and create actual value for that guy, before the 3rd year, the same guy will come and say, यार तेरे को पता है मैंने डॉक्यूमेंट में ये लिख दिया था, अभी आप बैठ के ठीक कर लेते हैं, right? So my concept in this is, and that's what I sort of have learned. I can't preach, but this is what I've learned, is कि the only thing you should focus on is creating a business, a viable business, right? There will be people who will always come along and say कि नहीं यार documentation ठीक से पढ़ लियो, या तू अच्छे वकील रख लियो, ये ना हो कि ये तेरे से ज़्यादा ले जाएं, कम ले जाएं. But what are they going to take away from me, right? 100% of the capital is investors. मैं तो अभी धंधा खड़ा कर रहा हूँ, right? अगर मैंने कुछ वैल्यू क्रिएट कर दी तो मेरे सिवाय धंधा कोई चला नहीं सकता.
So they're going to come back to me. I keep telling people, don't fight over clauses. कोई भी clause लिख दो आप वहाँ पे. After all, two willing adults can do whatever they want to do between themselves, right? So that is the only truth.
I think thank you for providing that perspective. You know, it's a different lens or a prism, you know, in which we are seeing the destination which is there at the end of the tunnel. I think, you know, it's just probably the road or the track that we are taking in order to arrive at the same place. Earlier today, I was in a board meeting, you know, wherein the same agenda was taken up, and it's just a small anecdote wherein they said that, you know, fine, we have seen a lot of black and white, but ultimately it's purely the numbers that speak for themselves, and we both want to arrive at the same place. Why don't you play as a true partner? The legal wing, you know, or the compliance wing, or the risk management wing, or the litigation wing, whatever you have in house, you know, why don't they make a true partner and align the incentives along with the business, you know? Because for me, frankly, the business is my client. I'm sure there are a lot of experts in the audience also. So whoever is willing to address or react briefly to that point of view and probably try and change the perception, please, Reba, given your extensive experience, would you like to throw some light on that?
I would quite vehemently disagree with what was said just now. And I think there are two perspectives, and different people also have different perspectives. I think the perspective that has just been told is any investor's dream come true, that I can have any document signed by the startup. And I just want to give a few kind of experiences that startups which have matured into a later stage, where documentation has actually played that difference at the time, at that point of difference. From the investor's perspective, the money which is being put in by the investor into a business is not his own. It is money for which he is accountable to a set of investors somewhere, and there is documentation to that extent is mandatory, because it's not free money which is coming. It's money which is coming with strings attached, and which is hoping to help a business grow, and which is hoping to give returns to the investor who has the investors behind the fund manager. So there is absolutely a necessity to have a contract from the capital provider's perspective. Now let's look at the recipient's perspective. There have been businesses, and if everything goes well and the business is super duper success, brings value well in advance of the timelines that were expected, all goes well, everything's happy, everyone takes money home, all fine, nobody looks at the document. There are also those cases where things don't always go well. There are always businesses which don't follow the path that they expect when they start. There are businesses where investors have been able to have the promoters leave the business. There are businesses where where if you've signed up to a certain condition like a drag along right, at the end of a certain period, if exit is not provided, there are those exceptional cases where investors have found the right strategic buyer at a distressed value, and where they have a very enforceable right to go to a court to force the founder to sell with them to a strategic buyer at a certain distressed value. It is not true to say, it's not always true to say that I'm the only one who can run this business, and if without me, the business will not go anywhere, because there have been examples where we've actually faced where investors have come to us and said that this business is not doing as well as we thought. The money was put in on these following terms. It's 4.5 years at this moment, and we don't expect things to go well in the next 2 years, and we do have a certain deal, and what are my rights under the document? And that document actually gave him the handle to take the business to a buyer who was sitting there at a certain price, and the founder has a choice of going to court. So do investors have the choice to go to courts with deeper pockets, and hence it will be in those situations where everything is not well and going all right, that contracts that you sign, whether as an investor or as a founder of the company which receives money, that it becomes extremely crucial, because there have been life-changing moments for parties on both sides, having seen many of them, where this contract could have made that difference.
Thanks, Reba. I think for the tactical inputs, The idea being to create more visibility for all the parties sitting across the table to actually know that this is what they're entering with, this is the ammunition that they have, and this is the battlefield they are supposed to enter. On a more processual perspective, Angira, we all know that we are living far from the ideal world. In the ideal world, we are supposed to sign a contract and just put it in the treasure box, somewhere, and open it only when it's supposed to be renewed or cancelled or terminated or something like that. But yes, how do we actually, align? So I think, the point which both Reba and Ashti were trying to make is that, we are probably talking about plugging the eventualities, the eventual case scenarios, the extreme scenarios, which may or may not really happen in the practical day world. Do you think there should be some change in perspective about how we approach the documentation, not to make it so extreme, one-sided, onerous, to say cumbersome from the promoter's perspective? Totally understand Reba's perspective that, from a strategic, tactical perspective, this is very important, because tomorrow if the things go wrong, you have to better be prepared. But however, from a documentation, the way you approach things, do you think that there's a need for a change in that? Because when I was working with a foreign law firm, they used to have a very commercial kind of a discussion even when they were discussing legal documentation. I think in India also the trend is really started wherein we put on the commercial hats first and then started thinking like the promoters to ensure the documentation is kosher enough. How do you react to that?
So yes, as I also mentioned 5 minutes back, that 2 years down the line, you would, 2 years back, you would have never imagined that you would actually be negotiating those standard form contracts with the big shot counterparties that you're entering into. But now, with novel ideas coming in, and with people believing in their ideas that they will be successful in the near future, various promoters have been able to structure transactions and get rights which would be unthinkable. So for example, as I mentioned, you would give very little shareholding for a particular sum. You would not dilute your shareholding later. And tomorrow if you had to give a return, it would be capped to a certain level. So these are things that you would not have imagined until a few years back in a typical PE transaction, where you would always see that the investor would dictate his terms. Also, for example, a very standard form contract practice prevails in the hospitality industry, where you have those management agreements which are standard for every chain, and you simply sign those. You can't really say that I'm not liable for your employees. You can't say that, because you simply have to sign which is given to you. But now, with the entire crash in the industry, owners have realized that we cannot keep giving all our earnings to the managers. And the managers have also realized that there is no point in simply thinking that we're going to fleece the promoters and go back. Or from a PE investor's perspective, that we fleece the company, take our return and exit. Long-term relationships are being given a lot of importance lately. And for that matter, even in hospitality sector, we've been seeing that the managers are also willing to own the companies, like a joint venture. Not simply invest in an entity, but handle them, have a long-term partnership, so that it's mutually beneficial later, so that everything is in a win-win situation. Tomorrow, if things do go bad, there is a document that you can take recourse to, but ultimately have a mutually beneficial relationship in that document as well. So that although you have to take recourse to the document, but that's only to renew it further.
I think that's a good perspective, that we need to have some kind of a balanced documentation rather than, putting extreme sides of the coin, whether it's regarding the operative clauses or some kind of, extreme dispute resolution clauses. We should have a more moderate, customized, tailored, and, a more contextual approach to having the documentation right in place. Abhinav, just coming from the point where Ashneer was pointing out, that the real value creation for a promoter, and I would somewhat agree with him also, thinking from strictly a business perspective, the real value creation happens only when I see the heavy balance sheet at the end of the day, or some kind of revenues flowing in, or some kind of, cost-cutting measures, either which way, it's adding to my balance sheet, which is a tangible result, at the end of the day. Fine, we have made so many processes, but strictly an Indian promoter's standpoint remains the same. And there, I think, a very important facet is the taxation, If you can structure it well from the taxation perspective, like you have all these innovative structures like LLPs, partnerships, etc. do you think that we can add some value at the structure perspective or how you constitute it in order to actually have some synergies at that level?
So yeah, that is definitely doable, and that is a factor which you keep in mind while structuring. But let me just take a step back. That when you're talking about the role of lawyers, law, business, and the interface, I think one should realize that there is something which is disruptive and something which is destructive. A tax litigation or a litigation can be disruptive or it can be destructive. The idea when you consult a lawyer is you should know what are the destructive factors. When you get into the business mode, you shouldn't be coming across something 3 years down the line which is destructive. Disruptive litigation, thankfully how the Indian legal system works, is a necessary evil. And you keep that at the back of your mind while doing business. There is no structure which can say this is a perfect structure with no litigation or with no exposure. So I think that is a very critical factor when advices are given, when advices are taken, that what is destructive and what is disruptive. And secondly, from a coming to your question when you were talking about the use of structures and all, please, structures are there. The government has given us a lot of options. But I think it is equally important to understand that why each structure was introduced. So sometimes government does not, sometimes government's doing too much about a structure or about a option is actually a problem, which is seen in LLPs. Now, LLPs as a structure generally were introduced for ease of business. But today when you see LLPs, they are actually not being used that much by businesses which are small scale, which want to concentrate on synergies of doing commercials rather than structures. These LLP structures are being used by big corporate houses for taking the tax arbitrages or the other arbitrages. And the pitfall of that is that these structures will therefore fall on the foul side of the law sooner or later. So for example, taking a very small example, LLPs and corporates. Generally you'll go to any advisor, he'll say LLP, no MAT, no DDT, company, blah, blah, blah. How do you do it? But you should, I think everyone should be aware that there is a thought process in the government. There have been huge corporate houses who have moved their investments in listed companies to LLP structures, only for the perspective of taking tax arbitrage. So it is not actually the commercial rationale for which you are switching to such structures. And there again you come back to the whole point that choice of structure should be driven by the commercials and not only by the tax benefits alone. Tax, please understand the back of your mind, tax is a cost. Yes, you're willing to take that cost, it's fine. It's never gonna, it should not dictate your commercials, but at the same time, be cognizant of the fact that you shouldn't reach a point because of your structuring where the whole structure is dismantled.
Absolutely. Yes, I think the point is well noted. The twin important takeaways being that yes, the commercial rationale, know your business right, be a pioneer in your business, and yes, the structures will fall in place automatically. And also the second very important point that you made is, knowing the litigation being disruptive, being a necessary systemic and a necessary evil in the Indian system, you have to be cognizant of that fact that, it does not really come as a shock or a surprise later on. So you better have, kind of pull your socks up kind of an approach that you are ready for any kind of, hindrances, obstacles, impediments that may come your way. Again, I think the interesting dilemma, let me just formulate it in a way. The idea is to somehow draw some kind of synergies and balance of incentives of both the sides of the coin, the commercial teams and the business teams. And the legal is supposed to play a role of both a true business partner, a dispute preventer, a cost controller, and a driver of the business as a whole. So I think that's a fairly important takeaway. How do we achieve it? The manner is fine. The matter, methodology is what the challenge that still remains, and we are evolving to a more mature setup now as we move along. With that, I think I can open the floor to any discussions. I'm sure there'll be some bit of questions for the panelists. Yeah. Oh, that's Chitra. Oh yes, please. Yes.
I mean, it's good to have a different perspective from you. Where do you believe, given that perspective, where do you believe that lawyers can be a value proposition for a company like yours?
Yeah. See, fundamentally आप एक चीज को सोचिए कि जो डॉक्यूमेंट क्रिएट हो रहा है ना, जो एक डील डॉक्यूमेंट है, that has no value. मैं ये बार बार इसलिए बोल रहा हूँ क्योंकि what does a deal document say कि मैं पैसे डालूंगा और मैं इस इंस्ट्रूमेंट में पैसे डालूंगा, दैट इज योर एसएसए। मेरे पैसे डालने के बाद मेरा और आपके बीच का रिलेशनशिप ऐसा होगा, दैट इज द एसएचए, राइट? Any, and I'm only talking about e-commerce and the tech startups here. I'm not talking about the traditional businesses because that's a different ball game. In e-commerce and tech startups, when I'm coming in, my coming in proposition is only an idea on which I'm going to execute. The other guy is bringing tangible funds, right? Where is my leverage? What do I negotiate on? वो बोल दे कि टैग अलोंग है तो मैं बोलूँगा टैग अलोंग है, वो बोलेगा ड्रैग अलोंग है, मैं बोलूँगा ड्रैग अलोंग है। मतलब मैं उसको बोलूँगा नहीं मैं ड्रैग दे दूंगा, टैग नहीं दूंगा। This is the conversation you're having end of the day in the room, right? What value is getting created of it, right? I would rather, have the lawyers actually come and say कि देखो यार ऐसा है, ये फ्लिपकार्ट का डॉक्यूमेंट है, ये स्नैपडील का डॉक्यूमेंट है, ये ओला का डॉक्यूमेंट है, ये ग्रोफर्स का डॉक्यूमेंट है। Between the four of them, you've got the whole universe of investors there, and all their wish list. Take the worst case clause for against the promoter. सबको एक universal document बना दो and sign करा लो. In today's market, any startup would be willing to sign it, right? So why are we sort of for every deal, every round, 2-side lawyers, 3-side lawyers, 4-side lawyers? Why are we going around and on and on against one thing which the fundamentally promoters don't believe in? And let me tell you, maybe in a public forum they will not come up and say this because some people get offended, but promoters do not believe in it. सचिन मिनी ने आज तक एक डॉक्यूमेंट का एक पेज नहीं पढ़ा होगा, मेरे फाउंडर्स ने एक पेज नहीं पढ़ा आज तक डॉक्यूमेंट का. So what am I creating and what am I serving to the guy?
Right.
The real value is, right, if you come back and say कि यार ये डॉक्यूमेंट के साथ ना ये ESOP स्कीम ले लो और इसको इम्प्लीमेंट कर लेना, right? That is the real value. Or you say in your business, these are the nuances, let me put up a package of solving these nuances because you've gone through the diligence. You know what the company is doing. You know what they're not doing right, right? Come back and say, you know what, let's close this document. As a condition subsequent, मैं आपकी ये चीजें solve करूँगा. That for me is real value. The whole documentation and जो उसको हवा बना रखा है ना, वो it is an irritant, let me tell you.
But
And
let me just add there that that's actually not something that we are guilty of as lawyers. That is driven by the investors who are coming in with tangible funds into your company.
Ma'am,
So given that, I mean it's a fair perspective. And my question then to you is, what is the value proposition that you have for me as a lawyer then? Given that you just want, I appreciate what you're saying, they're pretty much standard across deals that you have. What are the proposition that you would have for a lawyer like me to say, okay, look, let's get on with life with these deal documents. This is the proposition I have for you.
So I don't want to get too controversial here. You're all lawyers. I'll get beaten up, and I can't even go to a court of law and say कि मेरे को तो lawyer ने beat कर दिया तो एक और lawyer मेरे को defend करेगा. But see, somewhere this whole legal landscape is also ripe for change in business model. Somewhere it is, everyone, जब एक business चल रहा होता है ना, and the business has been going on for ages and ages and ages, you start believing this is the way it is to be done. My belief is कि the time has come with technology where even the legal profession is ripe for disruption, and someone will smart enough will stand up and do it. अब प्रॉब्लम क्या है कि अगर आप टैक्सी एग्रीगेटर देखो, ठीक है, अब वो एक पहले टैक्सी स्टैंड होता था, वहाँ पे काली पीली टैक्सी खड़ी होती थी, आप फोन करते थे कि भैया टैक्सी भेज दो सुबह, वहाँ से टैक्सी आती थी. नाउ बिकॉज ऑफ ओला एंड ऊबर हुआ क्या है, एवरीवन हैज एन ऐप, तो वो जो टैक्सी स्टैंड का बिजनेस खत्म हो गया, राइट? अब वो टैक्सी स्टैंड वाला मेरे को बोल रहा है कि मैं क्या करूं, तुमने मेरा धंधा खत्म कर दिया. This is going to happen more and more in professional services, which includes investment banking, which includes legal, which includes accounting. Now one way to say is कि यार हम तो ऐसी धंधा करते थे और आपने हमारा धंधा खत्म कर दिया, आपको मेरी कोई वैल्यू ही नहीं आज की डेट में, क्योंकि लैंडलाइन की कोई वैल्यू नहीं रह गई और टैक्सी स्टैंड की कोई वैल्यू नहीं रह गई, इसका मतलब ये नहीं है कि ट्रांसपोर्टेशन एज अ बिजनेस की प्रॉब्लम की वैल्यू नहीं है. There's a different value you can bring to the table, right? I am happy to work with lawyers if they tell me कि आपको ये लाइसेंसेस चाहिए. आज की डेट में फैक्ट ही है कि लॉयर्स को भी नहीं पता कितने लाइसेंस चाहिए धंधा चलाने के लिए. ये तो हो नहीं सकता. आपके हजारों क्लाइंट रह चुके हमारे से पहले, हजारों क्लाइंट हमारे बाद भी रहेंगे, राइट? यू कम एंड टेल मी कि बॉस, you are running this business, I will do 1 year project for you, this is the amount I'm going to charge, you'll have all the licenses in the country that you possibly need, I will also bucket them as necessary, good to have, you can live with it, and let's work with that, right? It's genuine business, it's a genuine thing on which your legal expertise is needed, right? But that's what the need of the hour is, not on the documentation.
Ashni, can I just stop you there? I think, thank you, Chitra. I think especially for the second question, because that really helps us probe the expectations and aspirations of the promoters as well. Your point is fairly made and well articulated, Ashneer. I think we've all understood that, yes, you're coming from different bargaining positions or different set of expectations, and this is what the formulation of value creation is from your standpoint. Fairly, I think, there could be one possibility wherein Grofers did not maybe hired the right counsel, so you have a choice of excellent counsel here. But yes, I think, the trend is right, as Chitra, everyone on the panel puts it, that yes, we have good informed discussions with the promoters to see that, this is the set of expectations, or this is the destination that I'm supposed to arrive at, whatever method or whatever road that I might take. But yes, I think, that's well understood, noted, and obviously will be acted upon also.
Ketan, just if I may add, I think the role of lawyers, as you're talking about, trust me, it's not limited to startups, but every client expects a solution-based approach, and that is what the law firms are these days providing. The emphasis, there is no sole emphasis on documentation, as perhaps it's coming out. So, no, I as AZB or Amarchand or Khaitan, no client is going to visit us second time if we are just simply talking to them about the legalities or about the documentation. I think there is a concerted approach these days, and in fact, there will be several clients who are happy with their counsel because the counsels these days have realized that it is important to have domain knowledge, it's important to have commercial knowledge, and in fact, that's how when you see any credential of a lawyer, he will have high praise from a client, not because he was able to identify 10 licenses or made a really watertight agreement, but he helped the client in achieving his commercial objective. So I think that role is anyway.
That's a very valid point. I think that's very important, well articulated, and I think one more important critical takeaway from Ashneer is that the legal framework as such. I was talking to someone yesterday, to open a small dhaba in say NCR, you require 101 licenses, NDMC, MCD, etc. So it's a problem of the systemic problem of the legal framework as such. Whether it's a symbolic existence of so many permissions, consents, registrations, licenses, whatever you say it, and the actual implementation deficits that creep into it. I think, yes, the lawyers are heavily lobbying to actually make the system more user-friendly, more investor-friendly, and more promoter-friendly as well. We have, I think, space. Vitika, do we have space for how many questions? Do we have some time for more questions? Can we just have one last question from the gentleman?
One last question.
Sure,
yeah.
please.
Thank you so much. I have a general question. Today morning, one of our panelists was, telling that startup is something which is not, presently available, and it is something innovative. I'm into a kind of a business where, I manufacture water purifier, where currently in market also it is available. So for a VC funding or as a startup, benefit, so is my business considered or not as a startup? Yeah, please.
Sure, please.
See, the definition of startup that the government has come up with in the startup action plan issued by the DIPP, of course it talks about certain thresholds about turnover, that the idea has to be disruptive, it should not be a Me Too kind of a scenario. Frankly speaking, while nobody will stop you from claiming that you're a startup because your enterprise is in a nascent stage, the only problem is that the moment you want to avail of certain tax benefits that I think you want to, you will be required to approach the bodies set up by the government. I think it's called the Interministerial Board. And unless the interministerial board certifies that you qualify as a startup within the meaning of the definition, for the purposes of availing those benefits under the government scheme, they are not going to be available. If you simply say you're a water purifier without any additional value proposition, unfortunately, my friend, it's bad news if you want to claim the tax benefits.
And just to add here, how the government currently has formulated its thinking, merely because you're a new entrepreneur or you're a small scale entrepreneur, you're not a startup. That's how the government understanding is currently.
Okay,
Whether
perfect.
it requires change or not, that's a subject.
Perfect. Forget about the tax benefits or something. I mean, how about a VC funding perspective? Will my business considered as a startup?
Okay.
Now, see, I have two options. First option is to continue with my existing product. Second option is something, coming with innovative of IT integration or going for IoT based, something. What do you guys recommend?
We have understood the question. Sorry, I didn't get your name.
Anil.
Anil, we just have a tea break after this. That's the good news. So can we just take it offline if you don't mind? Thank you, Rachit, and thank you, Abhinav, for answering that question. Thank you so much, audience, for interacting and positively so. Thank you, organizers, for giving us this opportunity, and thank you, each and every panelist, for making this interactive.
Thank you, Ketan, for thanking all of us and for the panel. Now, Ms. Anand would be given them. Ketan. For Mr. Ketan Mukhija. Mr. Abhinav Ashwin. Angira Singhvi. For Mrs. Riva Chakal. And Mr. Ashwin Grover. In fact, we really enjoyed your candid conversation, Ashneer.
I know. You got so many talking, so many of them.
We'll break for a quick tea and coffee break, but we'll be commencing our last session very soon.